When a counselor first enters the field, they must look past specific milestones like getting sober or completing a program. Recovery is a lifelong process of change rather than a single event. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration defines recovery as the process through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. This broad definition establishes abstinence as the foundation for the larger pursuit of a person's full potential. It frames success as the rebuilding of a whole life. For the clinician, this changes the objective of treatment. The focus moves from merely stopping substance use to actively helping the client construct a life they find meaningful. The true clinical objective is a collaboration. You are building a daily existence that the client finds genuinely worth staying sober to experience. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration identifies 4 core structural dimensions that provide the necessary support for a life in recovery. The first is health. This involves managing the disorder and making choices that support physical and emotional well-being, which often includes abstinence or targeted harm reduction. The second is home. Housing instability is a primary driver of relapse. A person cannot maintain a focus on long-term recovery while unsure where they will sleep. The third is purpose. Meaningful daily activities such as work, school, caregiving, or volunteering fill the temporal and psychological void previously occupied by substances. The fourth is community. Because isolation feeds addiction, recovery is sustained through relationships and social networks that provide friendship and hope. Stable recovery requires active structural scaffolding across all 4 of these dimensions to protect the client against the constant threat of relapse. Constructing that scaffolding depends on recovery capital, the sum of internal and external resources a client can utilize to initiate and sustain change. These resources include personal assets like health and skills, social resources like family and friends, and community resources like housing and employment access. Building this capital is a core clinical function. Data shows that higher resource levels correlate directly with more durable recovery. Even with high recovery capital, progress rarely follows a straight line. Recovery is inherently nonlinear, marked by expected plateaus and frequent setbacks. Because substance use disorders are chronic and relapse-prone, the field increasingly adopts a chronic care model. This mirrors the medical management of diabetes or hypertension. This model moves away from acute single interventions followed by discharge. It relies instead on ongoing monitoring, adjustment, and long-term support. Taking the long-view perspective protects both client and counselor from discouragement. It frames continuing care as a central requirement rather than an optional addition. To navigate this nonlinear path, clinicians use the trans-theoretical model. It describes human behavioral change as a movement through a predictable sequence of stages. The sequence begins in pre-contemplation. At this stage, the client does not recognize the problem and lacks an intention to change in the foreseeable future. Confronting or pushing solutions here typically produces defensiveness. The counselor's tasks are to build rapport and gently raise awareness without lecturing. Once the client acknowledges the problem, they enter contemplation. They are considering change, but are stalled by profound ambivalence. This stage is defined by an internal cost-benefit analysis. The client weighs the costs of changing against the perceived benefits of staying the same. The counselor's primary task is to explore this ambivalence. By examining the pros and cons, the clinician helps the client evoke their own reasons for moving toward change. Progressing through these early stages requires dismantling resistance through targeted empathy. Action cannot be forced on someone who is not yet prepared. When the client intends to take action soon, they have reached the preparation stage. They often begin making small experiments or concrete plans for change. The counselor focuses on strengthening commitment and identifying resources. Together, they develop a realistic plan that anticipates potential obstacles. In the action stage, the client modifies their behavior, environment, and daily routines. They are actively stopping use and building new habits. This phase requires significant cognitive effort because the client is restructuring their daily life. The immediate risk of relapse is at its peak. The counselor supports the development of new coping strategies and helps restructure the client's environment to manage high-risk triggers. Entering the action stage represents a highly vulnerable transitional phase. Sustained change requires maximum structural support to prevent a return to old patterns. Successful action leads to the maintenance stage. This is a prolonged period of sustaining changes and consolidating a new lifestyle and identity. The clinical focus shifts to intensive relapse prevention planning. This stage can last for years as recovery becomes integrated into daily life. Even in maintenance, recurrence is common. Clinicians view relapse as a cyclical part of the change process rather than a definitive failure. Following a lapse, the counselor must re-engage the client quickly. The goal is to reduce shame and facilitate re-entry into the contemplation or preparation stages. This movement between stages is driven by processes of change, the specific activities like consciousness raising or reinforcement management that propel a client forward. Throughout this cycle, the counselor works to strengthen the client's decisional balance and their self-efficacy, the confidence in their own ability to resist relapse. Treating recurrence as a learning opportunity transforms the experience. It becomes part of the chronic management of change, rather than a reason to stop trying. The practical value of the model lies in stage matching, aligning the intervention exactly with the client's current level of readiness. A pre-contemplative client requires awareness building and rapport. A client in the preparation stage requires a concrete plan and identified resources. A frequent clinical error is treating every client as if they are already in the action stage. Handing out homework and demanding commitment before a client is ready is counterproductive. This mismatch produces resistance and disengagement. It is a primary driver of high dropout rates in addiction counseling. Counselors often mislabel this pushback as denial or lack of motivation. In many cases, it is actually a failure of clinical matching. Reading the stage accurately and having the skill to meet the client there is the most consequential task in the field. It is the core requirement for building a durable recovery.